When everyone heard Forrest's voice, many were surprised. Chubb was delighted, while a few were clearly annoyed that he wasn't dead. As Forrest slowly walked over, Mr. Luo asked if he was okay. Meanwhile, two of his teammates who had run away earlier sneered and asked if he had been hiding all this time and hadn't even killed a single evolved beast. Forrest turned his head and smiled. "Looks like you guys have killed a lot of evolved beasts." One of them, whose name Forrest couldn't remember, smugly pointed to Fitz, saying he had killed 8 first-tier evolved beasts. Everyone around gasped in amazement, murmuring that Fitz was definitely going to be the top performer in this combat training. Fitz felt pretty good about himself. "Is 8 first-tier a lot?" Forrest asked as he took off his backpack and poured out its contents. Soon the ground was covered with crystals of various colors. While they were all in shock, Mr. Luo started recording the numbers. 16 first-tier crystals, 5 second-tier, and to everyone's surprise, there were even 3 third-tier crystals. "Did Forrest really kill 3 third-tier evolved beasts?" one student asked in disbelief. The other students couldn't believe it either. Fitz was stunned, then quickly pointed at Forrest and shouted at Mr. Luo, accusing him of cheating. All the students cast doubtful glances at Forrest. Mr. Luo shook his head in disappointment and then stood up. To everyone's surprise, he addressed Fitz. "Then show me how he cheated. After all, a single third-tier crystal is worth 500,000 Federation coins. Who would spend over $1 million to buy 3 crystals just to cheat?" After hearing Mr. Luo's words, everyone fell silent. Chubb helped Forrest pack the crystals back into his bag. Afterward, Mr. Luo told everyone to return to the tavern to rest. This combat training had exceeded his expectations. He then told Forrest that since they weren't official martial artists yet, they couldn't sell the crystals on the Martial Artists Union website, but could sell them to the tavern owner. Back at the tavern, a first-tier crystal was worth around 1,000 Federation coins. The students quickly decided to sell their crystals, since selling just 2 would cover their living expenses for over a month. Forrest was placed at the end of the line since he had the most crystals to sell. When the tavern owner saw Forrest even selling third-tier crystals, he couldn't hide his astonishment. Without any hesitation, the owner offered 500,000 coins per crystal. Including the other crystals, Forrest earned over 2 million coins in total. The owner asked for Forrest's account number to transfer the money. Just then, someone suddenly pushed Forrest aside. He turned to look at them mockingly. The 2 men were also wearing combat uniforms from their school. One was a novice martial artist, and the other was an entry-tier martial artist. The other students quickly recognized them as members of Class 1. Forrest recalled that Class 1 was known as the elite class, with almost all its members having reached the peak of entry-tier martial artist status, and more than 10 of them were novice martial artists. Forrest glanced at the tall guy and remembered he was ranked 108th in the Academy's combat strength rankings. This guy handed a bag of crystals to the owner, containing 10 first-tier crystals and 1 second-tier crystal. Then, he gave Forrest a sidelong glance and turned to his friends, boasting that being able to kill a second-tier evolved beast was real strength, something that Forrest and his worthless classmates could never compare to. He even insulted Forrest directly, saying how he heard that the Academy's worst student was in their class. At that moment, a voice came from beside them. "I'm the one you're talking about, but who are you to talk shit?" Forrest looked at them coldly and said, "Apologize now, or you'll see how you get your ass kicked by a worthless person." Luther got angry and clenched his right fist, saying he was going to teach Forrest a lesson. Forrest just smiled and threw a punch. Their fists collided with such force that the gust of wind nearly knocked over the people around them. Luther expected to shatter Forrest's fist with his own, but he was pushed back 2 steps, his fist throbbing with pain. Without hesitation, Luther kicked at Forrest, but it was as if Forrest had anticipated it. He was much faster, driving his knee into Luther's face. Luther grunted in pain, and the other students started cheering for Forrest. Covering his face, Luther admitted Forrest had some skill and gathered all his strength to charge at Forrest, using his bronze technique, Explosive Fist. As its name suggested, each punch sounded like an explosion. Forrest dodged every punch, his rage building steadily, reaching 90%. Fitz watched in amazement from the side, wondering how Forrest had become so strong. As Luther's attacks continued to miss, he switched to a new martial arts technique and punched at Forrest. Everyone watched nervously, while Luther's lackey sneered, thinking it was over. But in the next moment, Forrest stood firm, catching Luther's arms with both hands. The system asked if he wanted to use the charged strike, but Forrest didn't need it. He knew his strength was enough. Suddenly, Forrest twisted with great force. A crisp sound echoed as Luther's arm twisted several times around, ending the fight decisively. Luther's eyes widened, and a pained scream escaped his mouth. He stumbled back a few steps, while other students from Class 1 angrily stood between him and Forrest. At the same time, Forrest's classmates moved to stand in front of him. The lackey accused Forrest of being too ruthless. Forrest sneered, pointing out that Luther had used a bronze technique. If it had been anyone else, they'd be severely injured by now. I just gave him a taste of his own medicine. As the two classes faced off, the tavern owner suddenly stepped forward. He called Forrest's name and, with a grin, told him that the money had been transferred to his account. Forrest gave him an okay gesture and thanked him. The lackey was stunned, thinking he had misheard. Looking at Forrest again, his gaze changed. This guy really could kill a third-tier evolved beast? How could a worthless person be so strong? Forrest smiled at them, knowing he still had his charged strike in reserve, but suddenly, the room fell silent as several people entered from outside. It was the two homeroom teachers. Class 1 students hurriedly told their teacher that Forrest had broken Luther's arm. Chubb scoffed, saying it was Luther who had provoked them first. Mr. Luo asked Chubb to explain what had happened. After hearing the whole story, Mr. Luo stood in front of Forrest pretending to be angry. "How could you fight with a fellow student?" he scolded, though inwardly he was pleased. The Class 1 students always looked down on the regular class teachers, so hearing that Forrest had broken Luther's arm felt satisfying, even if he couldn't show it on his face. Forrest sarcastically apologized, saying, "I shouldn't have kicked his ass so hard. I didn't expect him to be so soft." Hearing Forrest's words, the faces of the Class 1 students darkened. It was clear Forrest was mocking them. Everyone else tried to stifle their laughter, catching the sarcasm in Forrest's words. Class 1's homeroom teacher, barely containing his anger, waved his hand and said to let the matter go. He instructed someone to take Luther away for treatment. Before leaving, Luther gave Forrest a hard look and challenged him to a combat duel at the end of the term. Forrest smiled and agreed, while Luther gritted his teeth. As Class 1 students left, the others looked at Forrest with newfound respect and amazement. Mr. Luo also looked at him with pride. He hadn't expected Forrest to improve so much in such a short time. Mr. Luo then told everyone that there was a testing device in the tavern where they could measure their combat strength. The students followed him to a room with the latest equipment. One guy went first, showing a combat strength of 450. Others followed, most of them entry-tier martial artists. Mr. Luo recorded each result. Fitz had the highest score so far, with a combat strength of 675, making him a novice martial artist. Generally, combat strength between 300 and 600 classified someone as an entry-tier martial artist, while 600 and 800 as a novice martial artist. Lastly, 800 and 1500 as a first-tier martial artist. Mr. Luo was pleased and told Fitz he could now start practicing the cultivation technique. Fitz was elated and bowed to him. Becoming an official martial artist was so powerful because of the cultivation technique. There's this so-called energy in the universe, known to humans as source energy. By absorbing this source of energy from the air, one can improve from the cellular level, strengthening muscles and bones. Soon, it was Forrest's turn. Despite knowing Forrest had defeated a Class 1 student earlier, most still thought he just had raw strength. The guy standing beside Fitz sneered, "A useless person with a bit of strength is still useless." Chubb retorted, "If you're so great, why don't you go break a Class 1 student's arm?" causing the guy to stumble on his words. Forrest stood before the testing device, ignoring the murmurs around him. He took a deep breath. What would the former biggest loser of the academy show now? As we fast forward, they have returned to the academy. Fitz and Forrest arrived at the office. Mr. Luo wanted to have a heartfelt discussion about their future paths. He told them that since both were now novice martial artists, they needed to start thinking about choosing a weapon that suited them. Fitz's expression was sour, still reeling from the shocking revelation a day ago. It turned out Forrest was also a novice martial artist, with an overall combat strength of 676, even higher than his own. Fitz couldn't believe that the person everyone called a worthless loser was now stronger than him. Mr. Luo explained that for evolved beasts above the third tier, bullets and laser weapons could no longer penetrate their skin. However, Weapons made from special metals collected from other planets were the only way to deal damage to these evolved beasts. He wanted them to start thinking about this for their future. Forrest had already decided to choose a spear. Mr. Luo was a bit surprised, noting that the spear was known as the king of all weapons due to its great lethality, but it was also one of the most difficult weapons to master. Mr. Luo thought for a moment and told them that the world's top-ranked martial artist used a sword, while the second-ranked used a great sword. Before he could finish, Forrest smiled and asked if he had noticed that the top 10 martial artists in the world rankings lacked a spear user. Mr. Luo thought for a moment and realized that Forrest was right. There was no top-ranked martial artist who used a spear. He suddenly understood something, but by then, Forrest had already walked out of the office. Watching his back, Mr. Luo felt he had glimpsed something called ambition. Perhaps this kid really had a bright future ahead of him. Forrest decided to visit the library. He obtained basic spear techniques and a cultivation technique from the library. Now, he just needed a suitable spear. However, he still wasn't able to shop on the Federation's website. Thus, he decided to check out the school's resource shop. As soon as Forrest walked into the shop, he heard a loud voice from a burly man. "Kid, what weapon are you looking for?" Forrest replied that he wanted to buy a spear. The man was a bit surprised, since not many students used that weapon. He then pointed to a batch of freshly forged spears and introduced one to Forrest. It weighed 20 kilograms and was made from meteorite iron, currently on sale for 50,000 coins. Forrest shook his head, finding it too light. The man then brought out another spear, weighing 35 kilograms. Before he could finish introducing it, Forrest shook his head again, still too light. With the third spear, Forrest was still not satisfied and wanted something heavier. The man, now a bit frustrated, took a deep breath and said, "All right, you want something heavier? Just wait." He then hauled out an iron chest covered in dust, indicating it hadn't been opened in a long time. "This one is also made from special minerals," the man said as he opened the chest. Inside lay a silver spear, which made Forrest's eyes light up. The man explained, "This spear weighs 65 kilograms. Its sharpness and toughness are unmatched by weapons made from ordinary star iron. This spear is called Silver Phantom." Forrest held the spear in his hands, nodding in satisfaction. The man laughed heartily and said, "This weapon originally cost 1.5 million, but I'll give it to you for 1.2 million. Seeing Forrest handle a 65-kilogram spear so effortlessly, he wondered if Forrest was really just a novice martial artist. Hearing the price, Forrest felt a pang in his heart. He wanted to pay in installments, but the man refused outright. Reluctantly, Forrest handed over his card, knowing that half of his hard-earned savings were gone in an instant. Back at the dormitory, Forrest started practicing the cultivation technique. On Earth, various energies were always present, though most people couldn't sense them. Martial artists, however, could absorb these energies, known collectively as source energy, to refine their bodies. After practicing, Forrest didn't feel any immediate changes. Curious, he checked his stats in the system space and was surprised to find that his strength and vitality had both increased by 2 points. Was it from the cultivation he just did? Suddenly, a system window popped up. "August lottery chances have been updated. Would you like to use it?" Forrest confirmed immediately. Besides occasional system rewards, there was a monthly lottery draw. It was just past midnight, and today was August 1st. As the roulette wheel began to spin, Forrest started praying. He had just spent 1.2 million on a weapon. He didn't want to win another weapon. This time, the pointer stopped on the rapid growth package. His curiosity piqued and he quickly opened the package. It contained wrist guards, leg guards, and a vest. Feeling a bit disappointed, Forrest suddenly received another system prompt. "Would you like to use rapid growth?" Instinctively, he confirmed. But the system informed him that he needed to wear the training gear first. Driven by curiosity, he donned the vest, wrist guards, and leg guards. The system then initiated rapid growth. A window popped up, indicating his current progress at 0%. The next second, he collapsed onto the ground, overwhelmed by a sudden intense pressure or weight. The previously light and flexible training gear suddenly felt incredibly heavy, totaling hundreds of kilograms. Forrest, already exhausted, thought about taking it off, but the system's cold voice warned him, "Warning, incomplete process. Removal prohibited." As the system's voice echoed, Forrest felt a jolt of electricity from the gear. Panting heavily, Forrest was informed that upon completion, he would gain 25 potential points. However, trying to remove the gear would result in punishment. Gritting his teeth, he began slowly adapting to the weight in his room. He started by crawling. The next day, after spending the entire day crawling around his room, he finally managed to stand and walk. He decided to run some laps, though progress was less than 1/10 complete. Despite feeling dizzy, he carried on. Just then, he felt a tap on his shoulder, causing him to stumble and fall. Turning around angrily, he saw a girl, none other than Stacy, looking apologetic and asking if he was okay. Forrest was momentarily stunned to see her. He stood up, patted her head, and thought about the little girl in his memories who had grown up so much in the past 2 years. She explained that she was preparing for her finals, and that their teacher had taken them to visit several universities to help them choose. Hearing this, he asked if she was applying to the Galactic Academy, jokingly asking if she really missed him that much. She blushed, but didn't admit it. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, "So this is Forrest, the one who used to live next door to you." A person approached with a disdainful look, sneering and asking if he was the so-called worthless loser. Hearing others talk about Forrest like that made Stacy furious. Philip shrugged indifferently and said he just wanted to spar with a senior student. Clearly, he saw how close Stacy and Forrest were and decided to challenge him out of jealousy. Forrest smiled and stepped in front of Stacy, saying, "Hope you don't regret this." Stacy was anxious, but Forrest reassured her. Having just run 19 laps while carrying hundreds of kilos, Forrest felt quite strained. However, dealing with a brat should be manageable. As soon as Forrest finished speaking, widened as a scream escaped his mouth, and Forrest kicked him away with a swift motion. The sudden scene startled everyone, and a few people rushed to check on Philip. "Forrest, I'm going to kill you! I'm going to kill you!" Philip cursed angrily. Suddenly, someone charged at Forrest. Sensing danger, Forrest quickly turned his head. His eyes narrowed as he saw the incoming strike. With no time to dodge, he raised his arms in a desperate attempt to block. He was sent flying. Forrest wiped the corner of his mouth and looked at the person who had ambushed him. "Brother, break his limbs for me!" Philip shouted loudly when he saw the approaching man. Forrest activated his eyes of analysis. It was Tommy from the Stryker family, a novice martial artist with a comprehensive combat strength of 752, slowly walking toward Forrest. Forrest recognized him as a senior student in the academy, one of the top 100 on the school's combat ranking list. "You broke his wrist. I'll cripple your limbs," Tommy declared, then threw another punch at Forrest. Under normal circumstances, dodging wouldn't be a problem, but with all this weight, he couldn't manage it. Forrest was sent flying again. At that moment, Stacy stepped in front of Forrest, blocking him. "You can't hurt Brother Forrest," she said firmly. Tommy laughed mockingly at her. "You damned brat! You're asking for it!" he sneered, launching a punch at her. Forrest quickly pushed Stacy aside. With no time to dodge, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and was sent flying once more. Tommy looked at the fallen Forrest and, without hesitation, stepped on his arm. "No!" Stacy screamed nearby. Forrest gritted his teeth, the intense pain making his eyes widen. Clearly, Tommy wanted to completely destroy Forrest. With a cruel smile, he raised his right foot, aiming to crush Forrest's other hand. In the distance, a voice called out, "Stop him!" Tommy glanced in that direction but continued. Just as his foot was about to come down, he felt a force push him back several steps. Mr. Luo was furious, shocked that someone from the Stryker family would dare act so brazenly even in front of him. "Tommy, what do you think you're doing?" Mr. Luo demanded, his eyes fixed on him. Tommy simply scratched the back of his head, claiming that it was Forrest who had broken his brother's wrist first. The girl stepped forward, shouting that it was Philip who had proposed the spar, but then tried to kill Forrest with a sneak attack. Mr. Luo nodded, pointing out that the entire incident was recorded on the surveillance cameras, and the truth would soon be clear. Mr. Luo warned Tommy that the school would decide the matter. Frowning, Tommy turned to leave, but not before warning Forrest to watch out so he doesn't get killed walking home. Forrest stood up, addressing Tommy. 3 days from now, let's have a life-and-death duel." Mr. Luo, overhearing this, turned around and urged Forrest to calm down. The girl also looked at him with concern, pleading with him not to go through with it. Holding his arm, Forrest coldly asked Tommy if he dared to accept the challenge. Tommy hesitated for a moment before smiling and saying that he would cripple Forrest in front of the whole school. News of the challenge quickly spread throughout the school. Many people thought it was a joke, doubting Forrest's chances. Back in their classroom, the students discussed the incident, now aware of what had happened. Chubb, sitting at his desk, remained silent, looking extremely worried. In the infirmary, the school doctor instructed Forrest to remove his shirt for a full examination. Forrest shrugged and said that only his left arm was broken. Did he really need to go butt naked? The doctor applied some medicine, and to Forrest's amazement, the effect was immediate. The broken bone seemed to start healing quickly. She told him that the medicine was from her family, known for its exorbitant price and ability to regenerate bones and muscles. She looked at Forrest angrily and told him not to get cocky just because he defeated a second-tier martial artist. The Stryker family's influence was too great for him to challenge. Forrest, however, was undeterred. He wasn't going to back down when someone was trying to ride him on his head. She let out a sigh and handed him a technique card. To Forrest's surprise, it was a bronze tier technique, Splintering Fist. Forrest knew the card was valuable and asked if she was selling it to him. The doctor merely smiled and said she had found the Splintering Fist technique card on the library floor. She explained that the Splintering Fist could create air shock waves with its punches, making it one of the fiercest close combat techniques. However, if the body wasn't strong enough, practicing it could cause severe self-injury. She handed him another bottle of potion, assuring him it would help him train faster. Forrest gratefully accepted it. She then grabbed his chin and said seductively, "No need to be so polite, Big Forrest. You're going to be mine eventually, and I don't want you dying so soon." She laughed, and Forrest joined in awkwardly. After some strange moaning and yelling sounds, "What were you thinking?" It's obviously from Forrest's intense training. The true power of the Splintering Fist became evident. It could injure an opponent from the inside out, causing their internal organs to tremble. However, Forrest hadn't yet mastered this tier of control. The potion had accelerated his progress, allowing him to heal and learn the technique more quickly. "Congratulations, Master! You are now level 11, the system announced. The past few days of intense training had brought him to level 11, earning him 11 potential points. He still needed 500 progress points to finish his rapid growth. Although he had gotten used to the weight, he could only utilize about 80% of his actual strength. It was late, and with only a few hours left before the duel, he decided to rest for a bit. That night, the training arena was bustling with students. Both combatants stood on the stage, weapons in hand, but most of the crowd was cheering for Tommy. Mr. Luo sat beside Tommy's homeroom teacher, who assured him with a grin that he had instructed Tommy to show mercy and not cause fatal harm. Mr. Luo snorted, saying the outcome was far from certain. As the match began, Tommy looked at Forrest with disdain, taunting him to surrender now or face death. In response, Forrest told him, "Even if you surrender, I won't stop." Tommy's face darkened, and he charged at Forrest, immediately using his bronze technique, Bloodthirsty Blade. The crowd was shocked that he started with a killing move. Forrest didn't hesitate, wielding his spear to block the strike. "He blocked it! Forrest actually blocked it!" the students exclaimed. However, a cut still appeared on his neck from the sword's energy. Tommy attacked again with incredible speed, leaving Forrest with no chance to counter and forcing him to retreat continuously. Not long after, Forrest's clothes were shredded, and a bloody gash appeared on his arm. Chubb looked worried, but Fitz reassured him, saying that while Tommy's attacks appeared fierce, they hadn't inflicted any serious damage on Forrest. Tommy was in disbelief. Despite his serious efforts, he couldn't inflict any real damage on his opponent. Determined to go all out, he unleashed another bronze technique, Flame Strike. Forrest, with his rage gauge at 90%, knew he couldn't hold back any longer. He decided to use Wings of 100 Birds. Instantly, a massive flaming bird emerged, soaring towards Tommy. Mr. Luo was surprised. He hadn't expected Forrest to wield such a powerful technique. Could it be that he had mastered the cultivation technique in just a few days? The two fiery attacks collided, causing a whirlwind effect across the arena. However, Forrest was still at a disadvantage, as Tommy's stats were significantly higher. Forrest was thrown several meters back, hitting the ground hard. Tommy, though slightly injured, looked at Forrest while narrowing his eyes. "You lasted longer than I expected." Mr. Luo, Chubb, and Stacy rushed to the edge of the stage, anxiously calling Forrest's name. Suddenly, Forrest stood up as if nothing had happened. His rapid growth system had finally completed, and he gained 25 potential points. With his rage gauge now full, he could use the charged strike. Forrest took off his jacket, allocating the 25 points to his strength and vitality. Everyone was shocked to see the hidden weights beneath his clothes, realizing he had been fighting with weights on. Tommy was momentarily stunned, then scoffed. So what if you remove the weights? As soon as the vest hit the ground, it left a deep dent on the stage, proving its heaviness. Forrest smiled, saying, "That was just a warm-up. Now the real fight begins." Tommy, feeling mocked, angrily charged at Forrest with another martial skill. But this time he couldn't land a hit. Forrest seemed to vanish, reappearing behind him. With a swift movement, Forrest's spear struck, and though Tommy blocked with his sword, it cracked under the force. How did his speed and strength increase so much? Tommy wondered. Forrest leapt into the air, brandishing his spear. Encouraged by cheers from the sidelines, Forrest hesitated no longer. He simultaneously unleashed wings of 100 birds and charged strike. "Impossible! You're just a useless nobody! How can you possess such a powerful technique? Die!" Tommy shouted as he charged. But his attack was quickly overwhelmed. He didn't have time to dodge and could only raise his sword in defense. In the next moment, his weapon shattered, and he was sent flying. The training arena fell silent. No one had expected Forrest to win. Was Forrest now among the top 100 in the academy? Moments later, Tommy struggled but slowly stood up, clutching his chest. He pulled out a bottle from his pocket and drank its contents. Instantly, his veins bulged, and his muscles swelled, ripping through his clothes. Forrest was speechless. Was Tommy trying to turn into the Hulk? He quickly realized that Tommy had taken banned substances. Tommy was now crazed, with only one thought in his mind: to kill Forrest. He threw a punch at Forrest, using the bronze technique Crushing Fist.